All right. Welcome back, everybody. Thank you for tuning in. Let me actually make sure my light is turned on here so everybody can see me. We are back for another rookie mock draft. This episode have Kyle. Kyle, you've been a recurring guest. Thank you so much for coming back.
Thanks for having me, Dynasty Doctor. Love coming on. I'm excited to jump into it.
Yeah, we are just going to hop right into this. So we have a 12-team, two-round rookie mock draft. So we're going to do the top 24 picks. But one of the things I like to do is we are going to have potential landing spots that you see here on the left side of your screen. This is using Mel Kiper's 4.0 rookie mock draft with a couple of twists. When we get to the end of the second and the third and fourth, I used another mock draft to help us kind of fill in some of those extra guys. But these are, once again, really the potential landing spots where the odds are right now. Obviously, you see Shador Sanders here to the Saints at 9. That's some recent news, but this is what we're going to go off of. And without further ado, we're just going to hop right into it. So Kyle and I are going to switch back and forth from the 101. Kyle will have the 102. I'll have the 103, and we'll just keep switching and we'll go from there. Once again, we'll get through the top 24 picks. So without further ado, I will go ahead and start us off with the 101. I think whether or not it's a rookie mock draft or, excuse me, a super flex or a, oh gosh, here you go, that's going to be an issue. But whether or not it's a super flex or a one quarterback league, I do believe that Ashton Genty is that guy. Really just seems to be the unanimous 101 in all leagues. Kyle, do you have any debate here before we move on?
No, totally agree. This is where there's a teardrop. It goes from Jonty, and then there's a lot of guys in that next tier. So you got to go Jonty no matter the format.
I agree, and that makes it a lot easier. We can move right on. Who do you have at the 102?
A lot of it obviously based on landing spots. We're going to assume this, but it also matters about team need. The talent level of the QB, wide receiver, running back, it's all about equal. There's no obvious pick. I think if you need a QB, Cam Ward's your pick. You can go a couple different ways. If you want to go receiver, I think there's a few different options. Running back, there's a couple options. Here, I think Cam Ward, the potential of Superflex League, that's what we're assuming this is. Yep. That value is just unmatched. And I think there's a drop off, even with Shador, of the next QB. I think Cam Ward's that dual threat. He's got to be the pick here.
All right. So there we go. Just like that, we're going to throw in Cam Ward here at the 102. Yep. And once again, in a super flex league, a guy that's going 101, there's a good chance that the team is going to commit more than 1 year into him. They're going to build around this guy. They're going to be patient. I really think the only other options, and now moving on to the 103, would be Travis Hunter or Amari Hampton in this situation. The Browns have talked about all offseason that they're looking to add a wide receiver one to their wide receiver room. And Travis Hunter, if he is a full-time wide receiver, to me really is the wide receiver one in this draft class. His talent is elite. And then Amari Hampton going 12 to the Cowboys. That's a sweet landing spot. Can't argue against that. I feel like I would like to go Hampton here at the 103 based upon that landing spot to the Dallas Cowboys is just really nice. That just seems too hard to pass up, and the idea that the Browns, you don't know who's throwing them the ball. In this mock draft, we have them taking Tyler Shuck at 33rd overall with the first pick of the second round. And that doesn't really excite me. Most likely, if they're taking a rookie, they're not bringing in Kirk Cousins. They just signed Joe Flacco, Kenny Pickett. So none of these names really excite me, even if you have an elite prospect in Travis Hunter. And I do just think the talent of Amari Hampton is just too good to pass up for such a sweet landing spot. So at the 103, I'm going to go Amari Hampton for sure.
Yeah. And I agree. I think that landing spot secures it. I think that whoever lands in that Cowboy spot could be, jumping spots. But Hampton is the second best running back in the field. So, you land with the Cowboys. I love that pick. For me, I think I would include Tet McMillan as, a possible guy here. I know there's a lot of negativity. had a couple interviews where he says he doesn't watch film. He doesn't like love football itself. But the thing is, he's just such a freak athlete. And, this is his career. I wouldn't just throw him out of the conversation because of some things he says, or there's some red flags about him, but I think he's at least in that conversation. Hunter has a couple red flags as well, more of how much is he going to play? Is he, built to withstand a lot of these hits? He has that smaller frame. So all the wide receivers really have a little bit of a question mark, Burden as well. Those top three guys all have a little bit of a question mark, but I think that is where I'm looking next. So in this next spot at 1.4, for me, I think I'm going to go with Ted McMillan. I think, the talent is just too hard to pass up. I think the Broncos is a good landing spot. You're with a young QB. They're looking to pair him up. He has a great coach in Sean Payton that's going to, find him ways to get open. They have a lot of playmakers, so he's not going to be, double teamed. They have Sutton to, take some of the focus off. They just brought in Ingram. I think I would go Ted.
Yeah, no, I love it. I do like that landing spot with Denver. Sean Payton really knows how to run an offense. Let me ask you this. Let's slow down a second. What are your thoughts on the fact that, not including Travis Hunter, that Ted McMillan is not the first wide receiver off the board? Mel Kiper has the Cardinals at 16, drafting Matthew Golden. I'm not a huge Golden fan. He really does seem to be sliding up the board, however you want to say it, rising up the board, excuse me. Ever since the college football playoffs and blew everybody away with his combine performance.
Yeah.
Do you have any consideration into Matthew Golden being the first wide receiver off the board? The Cardinals are a pretty sweet landing spot. Maybe there's not as much potential for him to break into the wide receiver one. I do, have faith in Marvin Harrison Jr., so maybe he's much more fit as the wide receiver two, where I could see Tet with the Broncos being able to surpass Cortland Sutton.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think he's definitely in consideration. He's in that level of talented receiver. For me, I just don't love the Cardinals spot. Marvin Harrison had a good year, but still, I would say slightly underperformed where his expectations were, and he's only going to get better. So, they have McBride, who's a superstar, getting a ton of catches. There's just a lot of competition for targets, and, the ceiling is just not as high as some of these other guys were. They could become a number one option and, be getting 140 targets a year. I just don't think, as a wide receiver too, he'll be getting that. And Kyler Murray's not one to be, throwing it all over the place. He's running half the time, then he's finding open targets, and he's going to be the third option at best. So for me, I just don't think that's his optimal landing spot to take Golden there.
Yeah, you brought up a couple of good points. Trey McBride just signed the big contract. Absolutely does seem to be that second target in the offense. And you mentioned something earlier about Ted McMillan, and we've all seen the video. If you are a Dynasty fan, you've been following the NFL draft prep about apparently he doesn't watch film. Apparently that is an older video. I believe it's from his freshman year, something like 2023. So that is something that's not recent. But for a lot of people, that is a red flag. The big separator when you get into the NFL and everybody is bigger and stronger and faster is that mental game, and are you going to be putting in the time in the film room? And that's what, and this is a good transition to this next pick, is at 105 I'm going to go Travis Hunter, with the expectation of the Browns are drafting him as a full-time wide receiver. They've been looking for that wide receiver one, and just when they asked him recently in the interview, they said, do you have enough time to play both wide receiver and cornerback? His response was, well, I only have to sleep about 7 to 8 hours a day, and that gives me about 16 hours a day to focus on football. This kid is a grinder, loves football, loves being in the film room, and I think somebody who you have no doubt is going to be able to excel in the mental game, which is what you want to see at the next level as an NFL prospect. So for me at 105, I think Travis Hunter being there with just that elite talent, and even though he might play a little bit of time at cornerback, the talent is just too good for me to pass up, even with the questions questions at the quarterback position. So at 103, maybe would scare me away, especially with Hampton being on the board. But after those first two first-round running backs are off the board, I feel really comfortable taking Hunter here at 105.
Yeah. And there's a lot of just question marks. So, a
Mhm.
question mark about his playing time. It's not his skill level. It's not his dedication. He's just – this kid doesn't go out and drink. He's fully focused on football. So, I love drafting a guy with that kind of mindset. I think, even if he's a 50 to 75% offensive player, I think he has, playmaking ability to become highly productive in the fantasy in only 50% of the snaps. He doesn't need to play 100% to be scoring a ton. So
Absolutely.
I like that pick.
Absolutely. All right, so at 106, what are you thinking? We still have, a first-round wide receiver on the board, a couple of first-round tight ends, and then a lot of really good talent. This is going to be a second-round draft that's absolutely stacked in talent this year. The day 2 picks are going to be really exciting for fantasy football.
Yeah, and this could come as a surprise. It could not. I actually have him as my number 2 running back-ish, like right with Hampton. I think it's, 2A, 2B. I think whoever gets the better landing spot will probably get that second spot. But I think Trayvon Henderson is, a do-it-all back. A lot of guys are saying, he's that Kamara or Gibbs where that, like, receiving production is just on another chart. And he's just a full-time, can be a workhorse. So depends on the landing spot. The Bears, they're boosting up the line. We're going to assume he's on the Bears for this draft. That could be a big-time explosive offense with Caleb and company. I think he's probably one of the more safer picks in the draft as well. He's a good blocker. He's just not going to come off the field whatever team he goes to.
No, I love that pick at 106, and certainly if you were going to leave him on the board, that would have been my next pick. That was somebody that I was debating at 105 with Travis Hunter, and I do feel like those 3 running backs have separated themselves. You can argue there is a top 5, including Judkins and Caleb Johnson. They've been mocked very highly, but in this case, with Hampton going 12th overall to the Cowboys and then Henderson not being picked until 41st, almost 30 picks later, I think in that case with the NFL draft capital would have me slot Hampton 1 tier above him. I do love the Bears landing spot. I think everybody's really hyped on what the Bears are going to do this next season with Ben Johnson, kind of the resurgence of Caleb Williams. They've invested a lot of money in the offensive line. So I think this is really how you're going to see a lot of your drafts play out with these 3 running backs easily going in the top 6, if not the top 5 or the top 4. Because the talent is just so strong. We've been hearing it for months about how this is such a loaded running back class. And on top of that, these top 3 guys have just, I think, really solidified themselves as the top 3 juggernauts. So, I love that pick. I think if you're at 106 and you're getting Trayvon Henderson, you are very happy at the end of the day.
Yeah. I think he can be going as high as even 2. I think he can be just behind Jonte. All those guys are in that same tier. It really matters about landing spot and what your team needs.
Mm-hmm. Well, and just like that, we are halfway through the first. We've seen 3 running backs go off the board, 2 wide receivers, and 1 quarterback. Once again, we are using Mel Kiper's 4.0 mock draft for potential landing spots for the first 2 rounds with maybe a little bit of differences towards the end of the second and the third and fourth. I'll talk about that when we get there, but just to kind of fill out our draft board. So, but without further ado, I'm going to transition over here to our second half of the draft. We're going to have the 107 through the 112. And dang, so I'm on the clock at 107. A lot of really good names. I think this is where you're going to see the tight ends start to come off the board, where if you are a team that is maybe needy in a tight end, where may say you have Travis Kelce or Mark Andrews, you don't have one of those top 5, top 6 tight ends who are really, young and solidified themselves. A lot of the dynasty tight end talk is from anywhere between tight end 8 to about tight end 15. Is they're very interchangeable. Year after year, you're going to see guys rise, you're going to see guys fall. But so this is the part where you could take a shot on one of these tight ends depending upon the landing spot. And once again, we have 2 here. So Tyler Warren going 10 overall to the Bears, Colson Loveland going 14 overall to the Colts. I really like Tyler Warren to the Bears a lot more than I like Loveland to the Colts. I don't really love that Colts landing spot, but I'm trying to decide here if I'd be interested in either, Shador Sanders at 9 to the Saints. This is a super flex draft,
Yeah.
over that tight end versus probably wouldn't take Judkins 51 to the Broncos, although I love that landing spot. I just think there's a lot better options out there. So we talked about Golden to the Cardinals. I'm big on Egbuka, but to the Jags, once again, kind of slotted in as that wide receiver 2 behind Brian Thomas Jr. And how does Trevor Lawrence look? He's been a quarterback that's definitely had some questions. I think
Yep.
because this is a super flex draft, I will go ahead and take Shador Sanders here at the 107. Um,
Yep.
I think the Saints taking him at 9th overall with the injury to Derek Carr, Kellen Moore coming in as the coach, that's exciting. I think people were nervous about Chris Olave and the health injuries there, but he is still an elite talent at the wide receiver position, and Kellen Moore, I think, can really build an offense around a guy like Shador Sanders, especially if Derek Carr ends up having to miss this entire season.
Yeah, I love that pick, and I love the landing spot. He'll start right away. I think Shadur's probably the most ready QB. I mean, maybe not Cam Ward, but out of the next tier, I think there's maybe more potential in Dart and Milrow, etc. with the running. Shadur's not a big runner, but I think Shadur is a safe bet to be a safe QB too. He makes the right plays. He's going to have some potential playmakers in Olavi, Rashid. So, there's just and it's a growing offense. They're going to, allow the team to lose and work through him. So that's a good pick. Safe pick too.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I can't agree with you more. So let's go ahead and keep it moving at 108. What are you thinking here?
Yeah. And this is where it gets tricky. It really is that team need. For me, I think I usually end up taking the most talented player. Those seem to be the safest. They figure it out. And to me, the guy that is screaming my name is Tyler Warren. I think he's just a guy that's going to be good. He can play. He's played QB in it before. He can run the ball. Just get the ball in his hands. It's almost like a Brock Bowers. Not that level, but, close to that level of a prospect where he's just a freak athlete, can run over people. I think he's a safe bet. And in the Bears offense, that's going to be up and coming. Ben Johnson's known to, get his guys open. I would assume he would be a 10 touchdown guy in his first year.
No, I do love Tyler Warren. Definitely have him a slight tier above Colson Loveland, and we talked about it earlier with the Travion Henderson mock to the Bears, where we're really excited for that Ben Johnson offense and being able to, mold around a guy like that. I think the rookie tight ends have been getting a bit of hype with the emergence of Sam Laporta and obviously last year with Brock Bowers being that generational talent. But I think 108 is a great spot. If you are at the 108 or 109 or even later and you can get Tyler Warren, I think the talent is there. I think this isn't just drafting upon need, but I do think, Aaron, I do agree, this is absolutely drafting for talent. So I like that pick at 108.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now at 109, once again, we still have Matthew Golden here, projected to be going 16th overall to the Cardinals. A lot of these wide receivers do project to be kind of wide receiver 2s in the offense. Luther Burden could be the wide receiver 1 for the New England Patriots, although they have Stephon Diggs. What does that really look like long term? Egbuka to the Jaguars. Man, once again, do you take a guy like Jackson Dart, who maybe would have to sit a year? I'm probably a little bit scared from that pick, taking a QB with my first round pick if I just made the playoffs last year at 109 and I'm waiting to, going to have to sit on that for a whole year to see does Matthew Stafford even play again next year. But I think if the Rams were to take him here with the 26th overall pick, they do kind of have a plan in place to start him sooner rather than later. I'm going to go ahead and stick with drafting on talent and go with Quinshon Judkins, although he is, once again, kind of the middle of the second round to the Broncos at 51st overall is what we have projected here. The talent is there. We've all been hearing about these top 4, top 5 running backs. The Broncos are a absolute fantastic landing spot. A lot of people have them mocked 20th overall to take a running back. In this case, they go with the wide receiver, get the running back in the second. But that is a high-powered offense. A lot of trust in Sean Payton, a lot of trust in Bo Nix. So I'm going to go based upon talent. And not reach. I think, once again, really tough to see me passing on Matthew Golden as potentially the first wide receiver drafted if we don't include Travis Hunter. I'm just scared about, once again, maybe that offense, him being wide receiver 2 behind Marvin Harrison, and also just so much uncertainty around how much his stock has risen in the last couple of months since the end of the college football playoffs.
Yeah. No, I love that pick. Judkins is a nice, safe running back. You know you're going to get, a stud back for the next 5-6 years. There's more potential picks, but, there's a lot of risk to them. So, for me in a first round, I'm usually taking a guy that I know will impact my team for years. I don't like taking a chance on a guy like Jackson Dart, even though he takes over. That could be, a gem pick. It's just so risky. So I like taking that safe pick in Judkins.
The Sean McVay offense, I think, is another coach that we would be really excited about, a high-powered offense. He's even talked about maybe does he retire when Matthew Stafford retires. It's hard to pass up on a first-round quarterback, but when you are looking like you're going to sit for an entire year, maybe it's more likely you go Tyler Shuck or Jalen Milroe, a guy that would two players that seem like they would have an opportunity to start in year 1 and kind of prove themselves.
Yeah, that's fair. Okay, so I'm kind of thinking at that 1.10 spot. It really is position of need. But I think talent-wise, there's a few ways you can go here. I like Burden. I like that landing spot in the Patriots. I think, Diggs is kind of there for the year or two, and that could be a 1-year deal. So this could be a transition to Burden if he's there. I like Golden, but they all have a little bit of a question mark to me. This is where it really gets tough. I don't have I love this pick. This is kind of where another tier falls off for me. But I think, Colston Loveland's got to be in the conversation. Golden's in the conversation. Ibuka's in the conversation. It really matters what you need. Do you need a guy that is going to be a guy that you can play, or do you want to go shoot for the stars? That's kind of where I'm at here. I think I might go Golden here, to be honest.
I was going to say that was going to be my pick if you don't. So are you locking in Golden?
Yeah, I'll lock that in. I think that's a safe pick. He's going to be in a good offense. He won't be double teamed. Maybe the ceiling's not as high in the first couple of years, but I think his floor will be high enough that, he'll be a startable guy for at least the years to come. Lock that in.
Yeah, and I think it's tough to look at a wide receiver who's drafted in the middle of the first round and maybe be passing on him for a wide receiver in the early to middle of the second round. I think this is where when you have a couple guys that are in a similar tier, you are going to lean on draft capital. Personally, I love Egbuka. I think he's one of my favorite wide receivers in this draft class, a guy that seems like a can't miss prospect. But yeah, when a team like the Cardinals reaches on Golden with the 16th overall pick, that really, I think, would help make that decision even just a little bit easier.
It shows they have big plans for him. They're going to use him a lot, so that it's just a security blanket.
Absolutely. So at 111, once again, we have 3 quarterbacks still available: Dart, Shuck, Milroe. We have a 5th and 6th. You could say running backs and Caleb Johnson, 61st to the Commanders. Cam Scatabo, 63rd to the Chiefs, would be an amazing landing spot. That's somebody I think I would definitely be kind of excited to take here. I think anytime the Chiefs draft a running back. But I still think that's taking, once again, I'm not at the point where I'm going to be drafting based upon landing spot. I would like to still be drafting based upon talent. And I've been talking up Emeka Egbuka a lot. Luther Burden's really high up there. Dang. You mentioned Colson Loveland. I just don't love the Colts landing spot. I hate to say it. The fight between Anthony Richardson and Daniel Jones doesn't really get me excited. Um,
Yeah.
and none of these quarterbacks really get me excited. It is kind of a weaker quarterback class. So I think at 111, I'm between Egbuka and Burden. Unfortunately, Egbuka, I think, is the worst landing spot to the Jags, where he's kind of stuck behind Brian Thomas Jr., and Luther Burden has the opportunity to emerge as the wide receiver one. I think a lot of people are really excited about Drake May. He really showed some flashes his rookie year.
Yeah.
Am I missing anybody at the top of the mock? No.
You said Caleb Johnson. I think he's got to be in the conversation. I think it's between those three, maybe four: Loveland, Ibuka, Burden,
And Johnson. I would put Johnson in a slight tier above Scatabo. The Commanders are a very nice landing spot. We're obviously all really excited about Jaden Daniels, Cliff Kingsbury, them signing Deebo Samuel. That's going to be an even more exciting offense going into next year. So I'm going to go ahead, stick with my guns, stick with drafting upon talent. Wide receiver that I have firmly as a top 3, if not a top 2 wide receiver, only behind Travis Hunter. And I'm going to take Emeka Egbuka at 111. I just think this is a guy who's going to be in the league for a really long time. Once again, I think I'm playing it a little bit safe here. I mentioned the possible emergence of Luther Burden could be the wide receiver one. There's some running backs with some really sexy landing spots, and this being a super flex draft, some quarterbacks that could emerge. So I'm going to play it safe. I'm going to play it with the guy that all offseason I've been really high on at the wide receiver position, and I'm going to take Egbuka at 111.
Yeah. No, I think that's a great pick, and honestly could be a little bit of a sleeper. Sometimes when there's in college a better receiver at your college, you kind of get overshadowed, and that's what Jeremiah Smith did to Egbuka. He kind of stole the spotlight. Even though Egbuka would have a big game, Jeremiah Smith would have a bigger game and kind of just take over. But Egbuka is not just as talented, but one of the most talented and a safe pick. I love that pick. There's a lot of value getting him in a late first.
Absolutely.
Pick.
Absolutely.
So 1.12, end of the first round. This is where, you kind of have to take a chance a little bit. There's no safe. Everyone has a red flag on them, I think we're still in that same tier. There's a few more guys in that tier: Caleb Johnson, Burden, and Colston Loveland. I think it's those three that I'm considering, unless I desperately need a QB. I would consider Jackson Dart here. But I think most likely I would not. I think I would go with Caleb Johnson. I think, especially in the Commanders' offense, that's going to be super high scoring. You got a young QB and a young coach that are just, bringing up plays. The only tough spot is there's a couple running backs there. Brian Robinson, I think Eckler's still there. But, drafting one that high, I would assume they have high expectations for. And, the ceiling is just really high. The talent, Caleb Johnson was dynamic in college. So I would assume, even with having a couple running backs there, he's going to take at least 50% of that offense, and possibly he should start right away. So, a little bit of a risky pick, but I think the talent-wise, he's in that possible tier of the tier 2 running backs.
No, I absolutely agree with you there. I do think he's kind of that back into tier 1, if not in tier 2, depending upon how you have your rankings of the running back. And this is the part where it is going to be a little bit risky. Do you take the shot on the tight end? Do you take the shot on the wide receiver with the questionable landing spot and the questionable talent? But you can't go wrong. These running backs are really strong. And the Commanders, once again, are a really sexy landing spot right now. And if the Commanders drafting a running back in the second round means they have a lot of faith in him, I certainly have some questions around Brian Robinson, and Austin Eckler is only getting older. So I love that pick there at 112 with Caleb Johnson. Absolutely.
Yeah. Yep. Thanks.
So we're going to transition back over here to let me set ourselves up. We're going to move back to the second round. We've drafted the first round, first 12 guys. We've taken 4 running backs, 2 quarterbacks, I believe 4 or 5
Yep.
wide receivers, and only 1 tight end. So this is the part where at 201, do you take Colson Loveland? Do you take Luther Burden? There really does seem to be a tier break here.
Yeah.
Man, I think, and I would even say with the quarterbacks, probably Jalen Milroe would get me a little bit more excited than Jackson Dart or Tyler Shuck, even though he goes a couple of picks later, being the 5th quarterback off the board.
Yeah.
But just the potential to start right away, having that much higher ceiling with the Giants offense now throwing to Malik Neighbors. I mean, you can put the ball anywhere up, and he's just basically just throw it up, and he's going to go ahead and get it.
Yeah. And Milroe has a lot of running ability. He's going to have a safe floor if, assuming he does start, which is huge in fantasy. And then you throw a couple screen passes to a guy that can take it to the house. That's just a great landing spot for whoever goes there. But that's a great landing spot if Milroe goes there. So I agree. That could be over Dart. He could be that 3rd pick of the QBs.
Yeah, and even Tyler Shuck. I mean, if Travis Hunter goes 2nd overall to the Browns like we see this, and they come out and declare that he's going to be the wide receiver 1, or he's going to play full-time wide receiver with a little bit of cornerback sprinkled in, he's a guy that has an elite wide receiver talent to throw to, and Jerry Jeudy's nothing to be shy about. I'm still going to go with the talent of the guys that I have higher up on my board. Once again, it's just based upon talent, not based upon landing spot and drafting upon need.
Yeah.
I think I'm between Burden and Loveland, and I'm going to go with the wide receiver. I think in Dynasty you really like to build around your wide receivers. So in my mind, Luther Burden would be the pick here at 201. I think he has a great opportunity to emerge as the wide receiver 1 for the New England Patriots. I think he's a big yak guy. I think a lot of people have described him as kind of a smaller or less talented Deebo Samuel. And if you can get a guy with a career like that, you're really happy about that, drafting a guy in the 2nd round. So yeah, at 201, I'm going to go with Luther Burden.
Yeah, I think you're spot on with, just being paired with a young, emerging elite quarterback of Drake May. You want to get that receiver that's going to be paired with him. So whoever gets that spot, that's an optimal spot. Burden getting in the 2nd round, a lot of times he was projected mid 1st round. So, this seems to be, he's been slipping a little. I know he had a down 24, so a lot of people are, a little questionable on him. But I love that pick. I love the landing spot. If they're going to spend a 2nd rounder on him, that's big time capital. The Patriots have been looking for a receiver to pair with him. So if this is the guy they're picking, I'll trust that. That's a good pick. I think this makes it a lot easier for me as well. I think there's a big drop off in talent after Loveland, so I think it's got to be him. And although I don't love the landing spot, I don't think I'm as down on it as you were. As bad as the QB situation is in Danny Jones and Anthony Richardson, a lot of the times when you have a struggling QB that can't really make the throws or whatever, they lean on the tight end. So Loveland could become that wide receiver 1 for this team, and that alone brings a lot of potential. It's not like this team won't score at all. You have JT that's, he demands 8 guys in the box. So, whoever emerges as that wide receiver 1, Pittman kind of took a step back, didn't have a great year. Anthony Richardson's more of that deep ball, which, could be whoever. But maybe over the middle, like they didn't really have a tight end last year. So maybe an emerging tight end is exactly what he needs.
I think that's the thing. I think you said it right, where there is nobody to compete for that tight end spot. I mean, even Tyler Warren to the Bears. So I'm a big Cole Kmet believer in the fact that he's a young talent. Tight end takes a couple years to emerge, and he's certainly shown some flashes. So I was pretty surprised when I saw Mel Kiper mock Tyler Warren 10th overall to the Bears, but I think that would be simply just looking for an upgrade at that position. They're not really somebody who needs a wide receiver with DJ Moore or Rome Odunze. And certainly they come back here in the 2nd round and grab their star running back. So Colson Loveland to the Colts, I think we're still at that point where we're drafting upon talent, or we're drafting on talent. This is a really strong draft class. I think you have a top 14 guys here that we've seen. The 14 guys that we've drafted so far are the guys, and I think you're really going to see a big tier break right here at the 203 position.
Yeah, no, spot on. And this kind of shows you where you want to be in your draft. You know, when you see these tier breaks and you have that like mid-second round pick, you're like, all right, maybe I can trade up to get to that 2.2, because all of these top guys right now are kind of in, like, I would consider Burden and Loveland, first round picks basically. Yeah. So basically there's 14 first round picks almost in this draft. I don't think the 2 through 6 is like, as good as other drafts, but there's a lot of guys in this draft that could be a first round pick. So, it's good to mock it out and get a feel for where guys are landing.
No, absolutely. And that's the great thing about seeing these potential landing spots, and draft night is going to play a big role. And yeah, the draft capital is a big deciding factor when you have so many guys in such a close tier. These top 5 running backs, obviously, I think Genty is, in a world of his own. But do we see Henderson as the RB2 over Hampton? Yep. So do we see Judkins being drafted over Amari and Hampton? Probably unlikely that Caleb Johnson is above Amari and Hampton. I think he's, I would say Hampton there is certainly in that tier above. But even these wide receivers, you have a top 5 wide receivers, if we include Travis Hunter, that could pretty much go in any order, especially that second tier of 4 guys from Golden to Burden. Would not be surprised if pretty much if any of them become that wide receiver 2 drafted. If Luther Burden is the first wide receiver off the board, or Egbuka is the first wide receiver off the board, once again, not including Hunter, would not surprise me. Yeah. I think we're at the part of the draft here where you have to start looking at these quarterbacks. Being a super flex draft, 3 quarterbacks being mocked in a row, Dart, Shuck, Milrow. I don't know who to take. Jackson Dart to the Rams is a tough pick with them bringing back Matthew Stafford at least for one more year. It's unlikely that they, I would say if they're taking Jackson Dart in the first, it's unlikely that they have plans to bring Matthew Stafford back for next year, but who knows? They could go ahead and make the playoffs and surprise everybody and sit him for multiple years. And Tyler Shuck to the Browns isn't a quarterback that really excites me. A little bit older. I think he spent 5 years in college, but he was in a pretty pro-style offense and had a lot of good coaching around him. And then Jalen Milrow just is absolute raw talent. I think to the Giants would excite me with the prospect of throwing to Malik Neighbors, but as I said, he's the most raw prospect of them all. Terrible accuracy. The dude can run and he's got a big arm, but how good is that if you can't throw it to the guy that's open?
Yep, spot on.
I don't know who to take. Let me leave it. I'll open up the floor. What are your thoughts, Kyle?
I'll try to help you. I mean, it definitely depends on what you need. I think if you're taking Jackson Dart and he goes to the Rams, I would assume he's going to sit 1, maybe 2 years. It's going to be that Jordan Love where even though they took him the first round, they want him to sit a couple years, learn under it, and then give him maybe the year 3 to start playing. So I would assume, don't take him thinking I need a QB in the next 2 years. This is a sit and watch guy. Milrow is a guy that is probably going to play year 1. So if it's a guy you need to be starting, Milrow might be your guy. He could be a QB, borderline QB 1-2 if he is starting all year and plays in that offense and runs well. Tyler Shaw, I don't see. I'm not as big on him as others. I know he's flying up some boards, but I think in all athleticism and potential, I would be going Jackson Dart, especially because the Rams. You're going to learn behind Stafford. You're going to learn behind Sean Payton, and not Sean Payton. What am I thinking? The Rams coach.
Oh yeah, Sean McVay.
McVay, yeah. I'm sorry. Learning in the right spot, I think, is huge for a young QB, and just being able to sit behind someone is huge. So
yeah, Jackson Dart is the perfect taxi squad position if he goes to the Rams. That stash, once again, you're not even going to think about him in year 1. And as I'm thinking back to the drafts just last year, he reminds me a lot of Michael Penix. And they had Kirk Cousins. Everybody kind of knew Kirk Cousins was going to be the guy. Certainly, Matthew Stafford's a heck of a lot better than Kirk Cousins.
Yeah.
But with that expectation of that value is only going to increase, and being able to sit for a year and learn, and with a guy like Puka, where you have the wide receiver one, just like with Michael Penix, you have Drake London there as the safety blanket. They're going to build around him. Certainly not going to start comparing Bijan Robinson to Kyron Williams. But I think at the 203, I'm still in the position, and I've said this before, I'm still going to draft upon talent. I don't quite want to start leaning on landing spot. Would love the Giants landing spot over the Rams, just with the ability to play right away, with Malik Neighbors being there as a top 5 dynasty wide receiver. So at 203, I'm going to go ahead and go Jackson Dart. I just think, based upon everything that we've said, perfect kind of taxi squad prospect, so to speak. He's perfect for your taxi squad, but as a guy who's unlikely to see the field in year one. But by next year, when you're going into the draft in 2026, you're going to be really excited to have this guy on your roster.
Yeah, and he's the type of player that is a little raw. He needs to learn. So getting on the Rams is almost a perfect landing spot for him. He needs to learn behind a good coach and a good team and a good QB, and he needs a year or two to figure it out. He has all the arm talent, the running talent. I think of him. I've gotten the impression of a more raw Mahomes. Makes those crazier throws and can do the throws off of rollouts and stuff. So I think he's just raw. He needs 2 years, but it's tough to spend pretty early draft capital for a guy that's probably going to sit for 2 years. It has to work out for certain teams.
And that's the thing. This is it is arguably considered a weak QB draft class. So it's unlikely that you would reach on Jackson Dart in the first round if he is taken by the Rams, with all these questions that we brought up. But when we're getting into the early to mid second round, this is a perfect time where you're absolutely going to take your shot on this guy. You can argue that the talent is there. I don't know. I don't see it, man. I have a lot of questions about the QBs in this draft class. Some people have him as the QB2. I can sit here and talk about how I think next year's draft in 2026 is going to be a lot stronger for the QBs. But sitting here in the moment, if you're sitting at 203 and you're staring these guys down, I don't think Jackson Dart is a bad pick at all. So, all right, Kyle, moving on to 204. Who do you got for me?
Yeah. And this is kind of that point. But I think if I'm looking at a QB, I would be taking Milroe. But overall talent, I don't think I would pull the trigger here. I think unless I needed the QB, I would be looking, what is this draft known for? The running backs. That's really where I'm trying to look and, get guys where they're elite talent and they just need to hit the right spot. And I'm thinking Scatabo here. It's not the best landing spot, as in they have a few running backs. But if he takes over that, the potential is obscene. That's one of the best offenses. They've kind of shifted to more of a run-balanced offense. It's not a pass-first offense anymore. And Scatabo in college was absolutely insane. He would just run over people. He could catch. I wouldn't be surprised if he goes to the Chiefs, he could be borderline first round. If I know they re-signed Hunt, they have Pacheco, so that's the scary part. But if they're going to use a second round pick, it just shows what they're going to do with him. So I love that pick.
Yeah, the Chiefs are really exciting. Obviously, they're the darlings of the NFL right now. If you've been playing Dynasty or whether you're new to Dynasty or not, you've certainly heard the stories of CEH, Clyde Edwards-Helaire, being drafted over Jonathan Taylor in that draft because of that Chiefs landing spot. Everybody got really excited, and he kind of became the rookie 101 and ended up being a regret. I don't think that's the case in Scatabo. He's really made the argument or made the case for being in that tier of the top 6 with these other guys. I've certainly seen a lot of mock drafts where people have him above Caleb Johnson. So I think this is great. I think it's a perfect landing spot. He would probably be in the argument there at 203 if you weren't considering the quarterbacks. He probably would have been my next guy off the board because a lot of these wide receivers really don't excite me. I have a huge tier of the next 6, 7 wide receivers that are all ranked similarly, and I'll get to that in a second. But Scatabo was really exciting to watch in the college football playoffs. He's someone that just runs over people. He really just is really hard to bring down and is really exciting. So getting the potential RB1 on the Chiefs at 204, I think, is fantastic.
Yeah, and he gets a little discrediting because he's not the fastest guy. You know, his metrics are a little off. He's a little smaller, but he just runs like a bowling ball. You know, it's hard to tackle him, and he knows football. You know, he knows where to go, when to, slow down, speed up. He's just a football player. So I love those type of guys. He loves football. You know, I would assume he's going to be around for a while too.
Yeah, no, you bring up a good point. He is just an absolute football player. He does have pretty good hands. I'm sure you could ask this guy to play on special teams and he would do it for you. He's just one of those guys that just loves football. Absolutely.
Yep.
All right, so back to me at 205. We still have a couple of quarterbacks, Tyler Shuck, Jalen Milroe on the board. I mentioned wide receivers, and this is where there is a pretty significant tier break in the wide receivers. You have 5 guys that have already been drafted, but you have a pretty large second tier from Jaden Higgins on our mock draft, I would say all the way down to Jalen Royals and Xavier Restrepo, where Trey Harris, Isaiah Bond, Jalen Knoll, people are really high on, but landing spot's going to tell you a lot, and we're going to go off of this mock draft landing spot, potential landing spots that we have here on the left. Once again, the NFL draft will really determine a lot because to me they're all ranked pretty similarly. I mean, obviously I would certainly take Higgins above Restrepo being drafted 40 picks before, but that could be vice versa. I could see Higgins fall into the 4th, no question about it. So because of that, as I'm sitting here taking a step back, we've seen the top 6 running backs off the board, top 2 tight ends, 3 quarterbacks. I don't really love any of the tight ends. I think Elijah Arroyo, Mason Taylor, none of them really flash as dynasty fantasy producing tight ends. I think Harold Fannin Jr. to the Bengals would be the only one to really excite me. And if he's there at the end of the 2nd or the early 3rd, probably take a stab at it, but he's not somebody I'm going to reach with this pick at 205. Once again, I just talked about these wide receivers all being ranked pretty similarly. So instead of reaching on one, if you have one of them in your pre-draft rankings who you love, if you love Jalen Knoll, you see here 58th to the Texans, I can absolutely see him coming in and being C.J. Stroud's best friend. That's fine, but I'm going to continue now to kind of play it safe. Once again, now I'm probably moving away from drafting upon talent and drafting upon the fact that it is a super flex draft. So I'm going to stick with the quarterbacks. I would be between Tyler Shuck and Jalen Milroe. Both of them pretty good landing spots. I think both of them have an opportunity to start right away. Oh, man. I was going to say Tyler Shuck because of the Travis Hunter pick. I like the Travis Hunter pick at wide receiver 2. The 2nd overall pick, giving them a really elite talent at wide receiver. But then I just thought, well, heck, Jalen Milroe has Malik Neighbors to throw the ball to. But I'm going to go with the fact that Tyler Shuck is maybe a more polished, NFL-ready quarterback. Jalen Milroe, hey, it's great that he has Malik Neighbors, but is he going to be able to get him the ball? I mean, he's a guy that struggled with his accuracy in college, and that's something that is tough to pick up in the NFL. It takes a couple years. I mean, just look at Anthony Richardson, and we can even point at Josh Allen. Everybody's loving Josh Allen right now, but that guy struggled his first year or 2 in the league until he got his accuracy under control. So I'm going to go with Tyler Shuck to the Browns here, taking him 33rd overall, based upon the fact that we see them taking Travis Hunter. Oh my gosh, he's way the heck down here on our sleeper board. That'll certainly change as the mock draft or the NFL draft gets underway, but in a super flex league, I think you can't go wrong with the quarterback here in the middle of the 2nd.
Yeah, and it's definitely a good pick. All 3 of these quarterbacks, and Dart, Milroe, and Chow,
It's just they're risky to me. I think you need QB. There's a chance they hit, and it's a great pick, but it also has a decent chance of just completely missing. And for me, it's hard for me to take a guy like that. So for me, I'm not really thinking Milrow. I think if I need QB, I'm definitely thinking about it, but I think there's just more talent elsewhere that I can get a running back still where possibly an RB1 or an RB2 that's a rookie, possibly starting. Here I'm looking at Samson. I think the Vikings is a great landing spot. Aaron Jones is still that veteran back, but he's been getting hurt and he's just end of the career. It's a nice transition to Samson, a nice young stud back that can handle a big workload. He just set the SEC record in rushing yards and touchdowns last year. This guy can handle a big workload, and the Vikings are a team that's going to be winning a lot. They're going to be scoring a lot of points. So even if he's only getting 50% and he's in a split with Aaron Jones, that's probably good for an RB2. And this guy can catch the ball. He does a little bit of everything.
No, I absolutely agree with you. I think my only concern about Samson to the Vikings is them signing Jordan Mason. I think them bringing in Samson as that next guy up really would say that they're looking to kind of move on from Aaron Jones. I didn't see anything that made me go, wow. I think he really feels like more of a fill-in guy who you would be happy to start, but you're not excited to start at running back. So the Vikings are a really exciting offense. I'm actually really high on them. I love Kevin O'Connell.
Yep.
Obviously, we all know about Justin Jefferson, but I'm high on J.J. McCarthy. I think that, and I think a lot of my trust in J.J. McCarthy goes back to the confidence in Kevin O'Connell as the coach. And we've been talking about these kind of high-powered offense and these coaches that are really exciting to have players for, the Sean McVay offenses, the Sean Payton offenses.
Yep.
Kevin O'Connell is another one of those offenses that it doesn't matter who he puts on the field. He's just going to be able to figure it out. These guys are simply going to score points. So it's can you get on the field? And Dylan Sampson is absolutely somebody that has the talent to get on the field. So I like the talent and the landing spot. I would still now at 207 be leaning on draft capital. So as we're going to transition over here, I'm going to quickly switch my boards over to what we have at the 207, just making sure my board looks good. I'm going to stick with some of these wide receivers here. Now we're getting into the middle of this. A lot of wide receivers in the second round. We have mocked 5 wide receivers in the second. Trey Harris in the early third, Jalen Royals, Restrepo in the late third. All looks like 7 or 8 of those guys could be in a similar tier. And I don't think you can go wrong. I certainly like all those guys over the talent of some of these tight ends and reaching on some of these tight ends. You want to reach on Devin Neal to the Bengals. I don't hate it. Once again, I'm probably going to go draft capital. So instead of a running back drafted at the back of the 4th, I'm going to go a wide receiver drafted at the beginning of the 2nd. But it really comes down to who do you like. Once again, I could see all 6, 7, 8 of these guys being drafted in a row. I don't have I'm not leaning any one of them over the other based upon talent. So you look at landing spots, Seahawks. Jaden Higgins probably might not play right away. They got JSN. They brought in Cooper Kupp. Jack Besh to the Packers. That wide receiver room is a complete toss-up. We just don't know. Isaiah Bond to the Panthers doesn't necessarily get me excited. Jalen Noel to the Texans. I'm going to go Jaden Higgins to the Seahawks. I think I'm just going to go the 6th wide receiver off the board. This seems like a team that's building for the future, looking for that wide receiver too. Cooper Kupp's contract was really a 1-year deal. They kind of gave themselves an out after 1 year, so it's likely he won't get a lot of touches in year 1. Maybe a guy that starts on your taxi squad if you have it, and you bring him off the bench, or bring him onto your bench, about halfway through the year. He is a big-bodied wide receiver. If we look here, I think he's like 6'3". But I'm just going to go ahead and take – am I missing him here? Here we go. Down the board on sleeper. Once again, these sleeper rankings will get updated after the NFL mock draft, I'm sure, as people start completing their rookie draft. But Jaden Higgins has been mocked as that kind of wide receiver 6th, 7th, or 8th in a lot of mock drafts. I think the talent is there, and being that big body wide receiver is somebody that I'm really excited about in the NFL.
Yeah, and honestly, I love when they have a veteran receiver. It's just someone to learn from that probably is only there for a year, maybe 2 years, but it might restrict his, stats the first couple of years, but he'll learn a lot from Cooper Kupp. Cooper Kupp's one of the best route runners that we've seen over the last few years. So it's just a nice way to learn. And then he'll probably step in for him year 2, maybe it's year 3. But I love that pick as a potential, possible stash for the first year, and then year 2 might be a big boom. So that's a nice pick.
And that's the thing is we're now getting to the point, the middle to the back half of the second round. It's unlikely these guys are starting in year 1 or at least are flashing in year 1. I mean, if you can get them into a flex spot, that's great. But you're drafting on potential. You're drafting upon, maybe that year 2 breakout, what happens next offseason, and do they have a chance to emerge?
Exactly. You're looking for potential at this point, highest upside. So I love that stash. There's just a lot of guys, and it's mostly landing spots. So it'll be cool to see post-draft, how much changes, especially in this section. I think the first round is, not going to change too much, maybe a spot or two. But, this we could see guys that are undrafted fall into this spot at 2.8. I'm still thinking running back, there's a lot of value. There's a few guys I'm eyeing up. I think Jalen Milroe is, by far the next best QB. Although I do like Quinn Ewers to the Steelers. I think there's a lot of potential there. Ewers has been, on a lot of guys' top charts, and then he's been off some top charts.
Yeah.
So it's a little inconsistency with how people scout him or like him. I think he has enough talent, and that's a great landing spot to consider. I don't think I would take him here. I'm just talking it out. Bond, I do like the Panthers spot. They've been looking for a young receiver to pair with Young. So, that could be, and that they started putting up points last year. The first couple of weeks were a struggle, and they really started getting it going. Adam Thielen became, a wide receiver 1 for like that middle section of the year before he got hurt. And, maybe Bond can come in and take some of that. Thielen's still there. I think he'll still be the receiver 1, but I think I'm leaning Bond here. I think he has enough talent. He should be in this range, and I like that landing spot with the Panthers. They'll probably be losing a lot of games, so it's a fantasy football spot where, it's going to be a high-scoring game. So they're going to be throwing a lot. There's just a lot of potential for even, what do we call that? Garbage time, And that's a big part of fantasy football.
It absolutely is. Xavier Legette, does he emerge? Adam Thielen's obviously getting older. I think some people early on had them mocked to take Tet McMillan at the 8th overall pick, but in this draft they don't. So it's going to be a lot of defensive talent there pretty early in the draft. I think you brought up a name, though, that I almost completely forgot, and that's Jalen Milroe. I think if Jalen Milroe is the 34th overall pick to the Giants, this being a super flex draft, I probably would have taken him at 207. I think I kind of flashed over that name looking at the wide receivers. I just think that he's a guy where Giants need to win now. Having Malik Neighbors, I keep coming back to it, as their number 1 target, is just somebody you can really throw the ball up to. So at 209, if Jalen Milroe is still there on the board as the QB5 in this mock draft, I think that makes it a pretty simple, pretty easy pick for me. And just someone that, once again, you're hoping can kind of emerge and become the next guy, can take that next step. Maybe doesn't look great in year 1, but has the talent there, and if he can put it all together, can maybe really become something special.
Yeah, no, that's honestly one of the 2 or 3 guys that I was considering. It's honestly a tier break after him and yours probably. But the potential, especially to start year 1, and Dable's proved to be, he partly developed Josh Allen. He kind of worked with him. So that could be a great landing spot. Learn from Russ Wilson and Jameis. It's a good QB room, hopefully, to learn from at least. You got some good vets there. So I do like that landing spot.
Now, let me ask you this with Quinn Ewers. Let me stop here for a second because
Yeah.
Steelers, obviously, they don't have anybody right now. I mean, they got, I think, Mason Rudolph is their starting quarterback.
Right.
If they were to draft Quinn Ewers in the third and then come back and sign Aaron Rodgers, how would that make you feel any different? Would it make you almost feel more confident that he doesn't have to start right away, that he can sit behind this veteran presence? How would that maybe affect your draft stock on him?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I think I would prefer to learn from a QB, not be thrown in the fire right away. I don't think yours is really ready to be a starter right away, no matter what team he's on. I think it's a good offense. There's a chance he succeeds, but a lot of these QBs, you have a couple bad games and their confidence is shot. They start seeing things, and it's a position that a lot of guys have proven to have more success if they sit a year, see it behind the scenes, and learn under a good QB. So especially Aaron Rodgers, who's had a lot of success, knows the game better than anyone else. I love that, to sit behind him for a year. Rodgers is, 1 year and he's going to be gone. I don't think he's got 2 years left in him anymore. He's still contemplating this year. So I think one more year and then he'll be pretty much guaranteed to get that year 2 job. So I would love that landing spot.
Okay, that makes it easy. Well, you're up here at 210. We got 3 more picks here to round out the second round. Who are you thinking?
Yeah, and here I think I'm leaning towards running back again. I think I'm going Ollie Gordon. I do like that landing spot with the Steelers as well. They got rid of Najee Harris. I think, Jaylen Warren's a nice compliment. I just don't think he's an RB1. He's a nice change of pace guy. I could see Ollie Gordon taking over as that RB1 for the team at least. And, the Steelers has just always been a great offense for running backs. They always have a good O-line. They're well coached. They seem to always be in games where they're getting their guys, 20 or so touches. So I love that landing spot. A lot can change if he's not there, but he's one of those running backs that could be, a late diamond in the rough.
No, absolutely. I absolutely agree with that. Gordon is somebody who, similar to Luther Burden, we didn't talk about this, but looked a lot better in 2023 than they did in 2024. I believe that Ollie Gordon going into 2024 was the number 1 running back prospect. I don't know if he was eligible to come out last year, but he was somebody that people were absolutely hyped on. And maybe teams just kind of stacked the box in 2024 and didn't let him flash. So somebody definitely to keep their eye on as maybe a bit of a sleeper pick. I'm a little surprised, though, that you went with Ollie Gordon to the Steelers over Devin Neal to the Bengals. I think just because of the Bengals being a much more high-powered offense. Not even arguing draft capital, only taking 4 picks apart. They're pretty much interchangeable. But I love the Bengals offense with Burrow and those 2 wide receivers. Obviously, Chase Brown is there, but in this case, they'd be looking to somebody to maybe compete with Chase Brown for touches. So little surprised that you went with Ollie Gordon over Devin Neal. Can you talk to me about that one?
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest thing is the offense itself. I would rather the Bengals. Joe Mixon had a great year, but Chase Brown looks so good, and he did it on the running side. He did it on the receiving side. I don't see him going away. It's at best going to be a 50-50 split. I think Warren is more of a complement. He can easily shift and take over that. Ollie Gordon could easily jump him and take over that running back 1 spot. So, that's the difference between me. I think if Neal landed on the Steelers, I would choose Neal. I think Chase Brown being there is the difference. He looked like a guy that could handle a workhorse running back. And, that's a 4th round pick. That's not an early round pick where I'm like, okay, they drafted him early 2nd rounds. They're definitely going to use him. 4th round starts to get to that territory where it's like, upside pick, but, we might not play him right away. So that
makes sense. I think you brought up a good point where there does seem like a path for Ollie Gordon to be the running back 1. right away, get more touches right away, and kind of prove himself. Where Devin Neal might have to work into it, maybe not have as many chances. Does he have to compete with? Oh gosh, who's the running back that got hurt and came over from the Colts? Zach Moss, I believe the
Yeah.
Bengals, is maybe
Yep.
the RB2 for the Bengals right now with Chase Brown, but it really does seem like Chase Brown's backfield. So,
For sure.
all right, I can absolutely understand that.
Yep.
So at 211, we have, the last two picks of this mock draft. Once again, we have a lot of wide receivers here who are in a similar tier. Do you go tight end? I don't love Arroyo or Taylor just as fantasy prospects. Maybe Arroyo to the Jets, but I'm really not a fan of Mason Taylor and him being a dynasty prospect. I'd much rather the idea of Harold Fanta Jr. to the Bengals gets me really excited. If you've been following dynasty this offseason and what he did last year in college and breaking all those records, that would certainly get me excited. Even though they just gave Mike Gesicki a 3-year contract, and we just spoke about Bengals being a high-powered offense.
Yeah. I love that landing spot and the potential for Fannin. I think he's the guy I would be eyeing up. I would just be hoping to, wait a little bit later, mid-third or so.
That's where, yeah, I think taking a tight end here at the end of the second over some of this talent, even though it is considered kind of a weaker wide receiver class, you love to, or you want to in Dynasty to build around the wide receivers. You don't really want to be reaching on tight ends, and tight ends take a couple years to develop.
Exactly.
Even some of these running backs here, we just spoken, Naja, about Devin Neal to the Bengals. Is he somebody that even really gets to play in the first year? Is he somebody that you're kind of waiting for a year or two to break out? So I would probably be eyeing some of these wide receivers, or we talked about Quinn Ewers, Steelers quarterback. They're somebody who rarely gets an opportunity to draft rookie quarterbacks. They are, they're pretty much good every year. They pretty much finish 9-8 every single season. So if Quinn doesn't start this year, is he somebody that you can sit, has the potential to start next year? They just signed DK Metcalf to a big contract. They got George Pickens, so they have plenty of weapons. So I'm probably here between Quinn Ewers and one of these wide receivers. I don't really love any of these wide receivers in terms of breakout potential or landing spots. I'd probably lean towards one of these second-round wide receivers over one of these guys in the third. I love Trey Harris as a prospect, Jalen Royals as a prospect, but being drafted in round 3 makes me a little nervous. I'm gonna go ahead and let's just keep the ball rolling. I'm gonna go Quinn Ewers, quarterback, super flex draft. Once again, the idea that may have to sit year one, especially if Rodgers signs, but he's a guy that I think is most likely going to beat out Mason Rudolph as the next guy up. So whether or not they do sign Aaron Rodgers, I think on draft night, and if you guys have your rookie drafts immediately after on that Sunday or that Monday, there really aren't a lot of quarterback prospects outside of Aaron Rodgers that are still waiting out there. I don't think the Steelers have been mocked to or projected to trade for Kirk Cousins. So I think Quinn Ewers in that offense with Mike Tomlin, with those wide receivers, certainly the Arthur Smith offense doesn't get me excited, and the low passing volume offense. But the potential to have a starting quarterback in a super flex league is, I think, too good to pass up here at the end of the second.
Yeah, the ceiling of value, I think Ewers is by far the most. So I think that's a great call. It's risky, obviously, but all players at this point have a lot of risk. So, for me, I assume I don't need to start this player. Let's go for the highest ceiling. And there's a huge break off after Ewers. I don't even know the next QB. So I think that's a good pick.
No, I agree. And actually, I'm trying to think who might be the next quarterback prospect off the board. Not somebody that I can imagine would get starting value potential. A lot of these guys, and we've even talked about this being a weak quarterback class in general, and I think that's what made some of these guys like Dart and Shuck fall to the second round anyways. So the idea of reaching on a guy even further down the draft board certainly doesn't get me excited. I'd be much more likely to take a snab on one of these running backs in the really high or really deep running back class, or one of these wide receivers who are still drafted in the early to mid second round, and the team's invested that high draft capital in them, and they're going to have potential. At least give them a couple years to kind of break out.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And, there's not a lot of great options at this point, so it is a tough selection. I'm kind of leaning towards Trey Harris here. I think the Jets is a great landing spot. They really only have Garrett Wilson, and the rest of the receiving core is, I think Alan Lazard and who else did they sign? The one guy, Josh Reynolds, so they really only
Malachi Corey, Xavier Gibson from last year. That neither of them really flashed.
No one that I think is going to command that many targets. So I really think it's going to be GW, and they don't even really have a tight end that they use that much. Obviously, we're projecting possibly Arroyo to go, so that could be a factor. But I think Justin Fields is going to bring a lot of flash, a lot of potential, and bringing in a speed receiver, it just could be a playmaker that the Jets are looking for. And GW is going to command a lot of attention. Harris might be able to just find some free space. The Justin Fields maybe not the most perfect quarterback. He's proven to struggle with some, but I think he does have he is accurate overall. It's just he lacks the game flow. But if the Jets put enough pieces around him, Harris, GW, Brees, I think it could be a good offense to be in. We'll go with that.
No, I absolutely agree with that. I think Harris would be a good complement to Garrett Wilson in that offense, and whether or not Justin Fields is the guy, do they move on next year or not? I think if Fields shows any kind of resemblance of a starting quarterback, that they would be likely to extend him, and he has shown flashes even from a couple years ago with Chicago.
Yeah.
With Chicago. And we've talked about how all these wide receivers are in a similar tier. So I'm just going to go ahead and break down kind of the guys that are left, and then break down our full draft here for a second. But Jack Bech to the Packers. I mean, what are the Packers doing? Is Jaden Reed the guy? Is Christian Watson still available and healthy? Dontavian Wicks, Romeo Doubs. There's just so many mouths to feed, and they've been looking for a wide receiver one. I don't really necessarily see Jack Bech emerging as the guy with Jordan Love. So it just seems like a similar, kind of mixed in with everybody else. Jalen Knoll to the Texans would probably have been my next pick. I think otherwise maybe Devin Neal to the Bengals, sticking with the strong running back class. Jalen Knoll is somebody that has really been flying up draft boards. Went to, I believe, the Iowa State University, just Iowa State with Jaden Higgins, and they're both in a very similar tier, very different play styles, but really flashed in the combine, really athletic guy. In the Texans, they have Nico Collins. They signed Christian Kirk, but Christian Kirk's almost just feels like a fill-in for Tank Dell. Who knows next year? I think going into 2026, that Jalen Knoll would absolutely have the ability to be the wide receiver 2 in that offense. Bills here drafting Alec Iomanor. I believe I'm saying that right. A lot of questions around the Bills offense. Keon Coleman. I don't remember who else is there. They certainly didn't bring back Amari Cooper. Oh, excuse me. They signed Khalil Shakir. So they're looking for a wide receiver 1, but Iomanor doesn't really profile as a new wide receiver 1, as a breakout. So I think that's just another kind of fill in, and let's just kind of see what happens, and more mouths to feed. Talked about Harold Fannin Jr. to the Bengals is exciting, but unlikely to take him at the end of the second. Feels like more of an early third, middle of the third. If you're lucky, if he's there, it's somebody that you're likely to sit on your bench for a year or two and hope that he emerges. Jalen Royals to the Saints is really interesting. He's somebody who would have potential to come in and be the wide receiver 2 behind Chris Olave. We talked about Rashid Shaheed, but I haven't really been all too impressed. Seems like a flashy, long ball kind of guy. I think him and Derek Carr had much more of a thing going, but now we're talking about the Saints drafting Shedeur Sanders the 9th overall, and Derek Carr possibly missing the entire 2025 season. Xavier Restrepo to the Eagles. So many mouths to feed when Philadelphia. Now we're just getting to the guys who are just kind of fill in. He had a terrible 40-yard dash, as we've all probably heard. He complained about his hamstrings tightening up, but really profiles as a slot wide receiver guy. Does he take over the Jahan Dotson role for the Eagles and get 5 targets a game? That's not somebody that you're excited to start in Dynasty. So I
The
think
one good thing I would jump in and just say is that Eagles offense is electric. And the one good thing is one injury to, a Smith or AJ Brown. And now Restrepo could jump in as, a very relevant guy. Obviously he's not going to get enough volume as the wide receiver 3, but, I like to get a guy in a high-powered offense that is one injury away from stepping into a great situation. So, I do kind of like that landing spot for him. I'm not expecting Restrepo to jump into most spots and become an elite player, but, being in the Eagles where it's a flashy, they score a lot of points and one injury away from fantasy relevant, I'll take that. So I do like that type of landing spot. I'll just jump in and say.
No, I agree with you, and I think that's the thing is when you are here to the end of the second, we're getting into the early third round, is you are probably drafting on landing spot over talent because there are going to be such large groups of similar tiered guys, so that separation is going to be the higher potential to be fantasy relevant. I mean, Tez Johnson to the Ravens, we can laugh all day about him weighing 155 pounds. Savion Williams to the Lions, Jameson Williams has had his up and down. Seems to be emerging, but he's somebody that, once again, is maybe one injury away from being the wide receiver 2 in a high-powered offense. So I like that. Similar idea there. So all these guys are very similarly ranked. Would not argue or would not complain taking one over the other. You're gonna see a lot of pre-draft rankings come out, but I do think the NFL landing spots and which teams these guys go to is going to make a huge difference come your rookie drafts. So I'm going to go ahead and just break down the draft that we had here. I'm going to kind of move the board left and right, so I apologize for shifting things as we go live. So we saw here in the I zoom this. I'll have to move the board a little bit, but so we saw here in the first round we have we obviously took Ashton Genty 101. That seems pretty obvious. We took 4 running backs in the first round, 4 wide receivers, 2 quarterbacks, and a tight end. That doesn't make sense. Am I doing this? No, 5 running backs, with Caleb Johnson sneaking in to the back of the first round that we see here. So I think this is very likely to for what you're going to see these running backs get pushed up the board. We talked about the potential landing spots. I mean, gosh, Travion Henderson could easily be the 102 or the 103 based upon where he goes draft night. Travis Hunter, who ends up taking him, do they say he's going to be a full-time wide receiver? Do they even talk about the fact that he's going to get cornerback snaps? And does that make you nervous from an injury standpoint? I think a lot of the questions in this draft came around the quarterbacks. And it being a weak quarterback draft class, Jackson Dart being the 3rd quarterback drafted, but to the LA Rams, what's his potential to kind of start immediately? Does he have to sit for a while? But I think we saw obviously 4 quarterbacks here go in the second round is likely, or I think what I would expect to see with that kind of uncertainty around the class. But once again, it's still being a super flex league. Certain running backs getting pushed up the board. Cam Scatabo, we mocked here him going to the Chiefs. Dylan Sampson to the, where do we have Dylan Sampson being mocked to? The Vikings at the beginning of the 4th round would be really exciting, a potential in that Kevin O'Connell offense to really produce right away and make a difference. So I think these are the guys. I think these are the names that you're likely to see in your first 2 rounds, maybe with a couple of other guys mixed in. Certain quarterbacks may fall down, maybe move up. But Kyle, any kind of parting thoughts, or what are your thoughts about this mock draft?
I mean, after seeing it, I kind of have an idea of where the tiers are. I think there's Jonty, and then there's another tier, and I'm trying to decide where that tier stops. It almost goes to Warren or Judkins. I think 2 to the 2 pick to the 9 pick, I would say at Judkins is very similar. I don't think there's that much gap between the 2 pick and the 9 pick. And then I think there's another drop off at like the Loveland pick at 2.2. So, you got to kind of
make trades to get the position you want and get the guys you think are going to be landing there. But, as we keep saying, the NFL draft is going to change a lot. So, we'll see. But, talent-wise, I think there's at least, 12 to 15 guys that are game changers that can really, change your team in year one, possibly.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there is a really big tier break at 202. Funny enough, I actually just tweeted about this, but I made the mistake of saying the tier break was at 201. I counted wrong. So I do agree. I think the top 14 picks with the top 5 running backs, top 5 wide receivers, top 2 quarterbacks, and top 2 tight ends are pretty much solidified. On the off chance, Cam Scatterbo gets the really good draft stock. Jackson Dart goes to really nice spots. Say he goes 21st overall to the Steelers, and you're thinking, man, that guy could start right away. Superflex league, I'm not going to, think twice about maybe taking him in the first round. But I do think those top 14 guys have kind of solidified themselves. There's certainly going to be some smaller tiers in between there, and then after that, you're really drafting upon a combination of talent and landing spot, but I think those top 14 guys, the talent alone is going to push them up to the top of the board. So I definitely agree with you there.
Yeah. I'm just excited to see after the draft how much changes. We'll have to do a little comparison.
We'll have to get ourselves into doing another mock draft probably shortly after the NFL draft with the actual landing spots here. That'll help us kind of practice for our own leagues. I mean, you and I are in a ton of leagues together and a ton of leagues of our own. So this is just a really great practice. I hope everybody out there appreciated this. And Kyle, any other parting thoughts? I think we're going to kind of wrap it up there. I'm just going to go ahead and quickly kind of self-promote myself. Once again, brand new channel. Please follow along. Going to, posting regularly on Twitter, trying to post every day, doing videos on YouTube, just kind of helping people get involved, trying to keep it a lot of factual based information, trying not to have a lot of my own opinions in there, but unfortunately I can't always keep my own opinions out of it. But Kyle, do you have any parting thoughts for the people?
No, just thanks for having me on. Drafting is one of the most fun things about fantasy football. So even the mock drafts are, a lot of fun. Thanks for having me on. Can't wait to have the next one, the post NFL draft, and really, dive into where these guys are going to go. Thanks for having me on, man.
Anytime. I'm sure I'll have you back here in the next week or two as we do it again, or especially right after the NFL draft. But with that, I'll go ahead and close this out. Thanks everybody for tuning in.